So, in this week's provocation, we'll be thinking closely with this quote by Sarah Ahmed and staying with her metaphor of the playing field as a supposedly neutral site for integration and inclusion. So, how might this space compare to the early childhood classroom? Are early childhood classrooms neutral? Considering the histories of the structures of the early childhood classroom and how they are very much informed by Euro-Western histories of thought through ongoing settler colonialism in Canada, what does inclusion look like within this framing, and what does this do to difference and diversity? What happens to difference when children and families are invited to play this game? So Ahmed argues that multiculturalism is attributed value through alignment to this story of happiness, an alignment into a white, European, cisgender, able-bodied, heterosexual construction of life. So in your responses within the forums this week, let's consider what gets hidden, displaced, or negated under the public signs of multiculturalism, and what might the happy, smiling image of Canadian multiculturalism veil. So Ahmed discusses happiness as more than a momentary emotion, but rather as an evaluation of one's life within a social context. So assumed images of happiness are attributed to particular bodies in particular ways. Who is able to be happy? Who is assumed to ought to be happy? Ahmed borrows from Marilyn Frye when she suggests that happiness is often a requirement of oppressed people. Frye writes, quote, "It is often a requirement upon oppressed people that we smile and be cheerful. Anything but the sunniest countenance exposes us to being perceived as mean, bitter, angry, or dangerous." End quote. So we can see here how happiness is allocated within racial and gendered discourses. And Ahmed speaks about this in terms of the melancholy migrant, those who voice racial inequities or display visual acts of difference as often perceived as threats to the smooth flow of happiness. So media attention around burqas in the United States and Canada have been one example of this perceived threat. Difference is assumed as something that is problematic to the flow. Western notions of happiness then have particular expectations. Women are often assumed to be happy, smiley, sweet, lighthearted. Often an unhappy or even angry woman is perceived as dramatic, foul, or crazy. Dominant images of happiness reinforce a social pressure to maintain the performances of said happiness as a way of getting along, where the state offers supposed freedom to migrants for accepting its game. So happiness and freedom become associated with whiteness in this context. So some bodies, more than others, embody the promise of happiness, the dominant social construction of a happy, good life. Yet happiness and the supposed freedom associated with it, consider the idealism of the American dream and the ultimate pursuit of the good, free, and happy life, positions happiness as an expectation of perceived, socially assumed milestones. So a pathway or direction through the life course that sets predetermined milestones that are expected from birth, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, marriage, reproduction, and death. Falling outside this linear progression of life proposes a potential problem in the pursuit of happiness. And Ahmed discusses how in this context, the queer child, often positioned within normative standards of happiness, becomes a problem, a site of possible unhappiness. And we can see here how normativities create the realm of what is perceived as happy, and those who exist outside that norm or who are non-conforming to that norm and these standards may be excluded. So this week's article is not to suggest that we ought to be unhappy, but rather I hope it's invited you to interrogate some of the common assumptions about our everyday realities and to consider, as Ahmed writes, quote, "the exposure of these unhappy effects as affirmative," end quote. as a sort of alternative set of imaginings of what might count as a good or at least more possible life. An opportunity to move outside the ideals that confine multiplicity. And this is the kind of questioning and critical thought that will inspire, hopefully, your roundtable groups. So next week, we have our first roundtable conversation by Group 1, Paige, Megan, Sue, and Astrid. And in this assignment, groups will prepare, record, and share a roundtable conversation that discusses the key concepts and an analysis of weekly readings. So unless your group would like to meet in person, the conversation can take place on Skype, and one member will need to record a video of their screen and upload this video to YouTube or another program that offers a shareable link. And I'll offer some more options on the next slides. And then, and then give those to you. And once you record it, upload a link, you can share that link on Moodle. So the roundtable conversation will last between 12 and 15 minutes and must be posted on the Sunday of your week. So for example, Group 1 will post on Sunday, January 27th for week 4. So the purpose of this assignment is to really encourage a rich and deep discussion of the weekly readings and offer you an opportunity to tease out and unpack some of the key course concepts in dialogue with others. So your conversation should be framed around these points: a brief overview of the week's reading and key concepts, how these concepts live and show up in early childhood education, how do these articles unsettle and disrupt common assumptions about inclusion, and what do these articles suggest about the concept of difference? So some expectations for the roundtable assignment. Your group should be discussing ideas in a clear and organized and thoughtful way. You should be demonstrating shared and engaged discussion, dissensus, and dialogue. So this is not only a presentation, but a conversation. The conversation reflects a critical attention to the text and key ideas. The conversation has a clear understanding of how these ideas are connected to early childhood education, and it must take a critical lens. So really thinking through that social constructionist theory that we discussed last week. So this conversation should not suffer from concept fragmentation or disorganization. So it should really flow with nuance and make sense in the context of the readings. The conversation shows evidence of the group's multiple perspectives and an attitude of respectful questioning and ongoing curiosity. So this assignment isn't aimed for you to state how things ought to be or how you think it should be, but rather you should be engaging with questions and conversations and curiosity with your group members. So I encourage you to read very closely the grading rubric and ensure that your conversations cover these criteria, as this is how it'll be marked. The most important aspect of this assignment is demonstrating an understanding of the readings. In order to offer a rich conversation that unpacks the readings and the content, you'll need to first understand them well. And these are complex topics, so you'll need to read through them closely with your group and ensure that your roundtable is sharing the correct information about the readings. And this will require time with your group, reading together, preparing, and perhaps rehearsing before you meet to record. So this should be well prepared. So as you're basing your conversation in the text, you should be unpacking and making sense of what the author is trying to say. So this is less about your opinion again or what you think ought to be done in early childhood, but rather read closely, ask questions based on the text. And my biggest suggestion here is to ground your conversation in the literature. You shouldn't just be providing direct quotes, but really configure yourself in relation to the author's perspective. What are they alluding to? What are they trying to get us to pay attention to? So once you have your recording, you can post it on Moodle, and you can record it using these options. So Screen-O-Matic is one website that allows you to record and save a video of your screen. You can also use this debut screen and video recorder for free if you have a PC, and that is on the App Store on your PC computer. And then also you can use QuickTime on a Mac if you're using a Mac. You can also look up on YouTube other resources for recording your screen. So there are a lot of options available out there. If you're having difficulty, please do feel free to email me or message me on Moodle. So just to finish off, I'd like to highlight something that was mentioned in our week 2 provocation. Ryan offered us something very interesting to think with as we move forward in this course, especially considering next week's topic of settler colonialism in Canada and the ways in which colonialism lives in education and our own subjectivities. So Ryan this week wrote, "We listen with thinking." And this statement highlights that our ways of listening and receiving are very much subjective in nature. That what we are able to listen to is predicated on our previous experiences and worldviews. So our lenses are framed by everything that came before a single encounter of listening. And those previous experiences are with us as we listen and influence then what we are able to hear. So I think that this subjective aspect of listening is crucial to attend to. It requires us to confront and think through our own positionalities and the histories that inform these positionalities, not necessarily to rid ourselves of them or eliminate bias, as if we can arrive at these conversations neutrally, but to stay with them and become aware of how our positionalities shape the ways in which we receive and understand others, how we are able then to meet with others in spaces of difference. So this is something that I invite you to stay with as we move on into our next weeks. And again, if you have any questions or would like to reach out to me, feel free to send me a message on Moodle or email me. Okay, that's it. Have a great week, everyone. Thanks.